Chump in China, April 7th, 2006. Dear Fred and Father, Enclosed you will find a copy of my draft to Diane, aka the Lady Di, describing my latest adventure to China. Please do not copy or distribute it in any form, as we are currently trying to get Brad Pitt to commit to our project, but he is reluctant to do sequels. You're welcome to share it with whomever you wish, as long as they are willing to read it in your presence. Jeffrey. April 5th, 2006. Dear Di, the following story needs to be typed out before it suffers the same fate as the Peru tale. It's 2:00 in the morning. I will do my best, but, as always, you must make it better. The time is short, and I need to load the raw data into the computer, but the journal is weak. I need to put a frame around this story. In the end, it will basically be nothing but a series of letters written to you, but never sent. They were written in haste, and only when time permitted. Jeffrey. April 5th, 2006. Dear Di, I just can't tell you how much I enjoyed watching you read the first part of this story while sipping a glass of wine at La Buvette, basking on the patio in the evening sunlight, in the security of an Omaha bistro. There is so much time-shifting in this unfinished product that you will either say this is my finest piece of nonfiction fiction to date, or you will say it is great. Don't change a word. Why I feel the need to record these adventures in my life is beyond me. The only thing I really would like history to say about me is, and they lived happily ever after. After? After what? Being on top of the world. After that, living should be easy. Couldn't get much worse. Let me explain. Jeffrey. March 23rd, 2006. Taylor drove me to the airport this morning at 5:30 a.m. It was early. I left my glasses at work, so on the way we had to stop and pick them up. I thought it would be nice to be able to see in the strange new land. After that, we were off, dashing to a departure time that was coming too quickly. My last words to Butte were, "It's your job to claim the body." A hug, a manly tear, and then, "See you, maybe?" A smile, pick up the pack and the tent, and then gone. The next part of the day consisted of flying from Omaha to Newark, New Jersey, 2 hours and 45 minutes. From there to Beijing, 13 hours and 45 minutes. The plane flew over the North Pole. The ice floes were beautiful. If you looked, you could see rivers within the sea. A truly awesome sight. Then suddenly, there before me, 7 days in Tibet, 4 days in Beijing. Day 1, March 23rd, 2006. USA to China via Continental. USA, population 295,734,134. China, population 1,306,313,812. Day 2, March 24th, 2006. Capital Hotel, Beijing. 3 Tiananmen East Street, Beijing, China. Altitude, 2,985 feet. Population, 14,930,900. Dear Di, it's 3 a.m. in Beijing. I am alive. I know this because all I can think about is my love for you, the kids, and the life we have that grows by the minute. I know this because I watch the minutes tick by slowly. It's been 3 days now. I have slept a total of maybe 4 hours. So much to see, so much to do. Good thing I'm fat. It is my strength. When Beijing went to sleep, I took a walkabout. 3 hours of walking in the deserted streets. I feel safe walking around Tiananmen Square, snapping pictures as I go. During the day, everyone is trying to sell me stuff, but my power to say booyah, don't want, comes from my lack of money. The young people here want to talk to me and practice their English. I met 3 nice kids who took me to some back alley next to the square and showed me their art school. I met their teacher, Lhasa. I didn't know how to exit gracefully without insulting them, so I bought one of their pictures. I didn't want to carry it around, but it was a picture of 2 swans in the winter of their life. All I could think of was how I want to spend the winter of my life with you. Everything here is based on balance and serenity. The pictures are painted in sets of 4. Spring, summer, fall, and winter, representing the progression of life. I wanted to buy all of them, but they cost 600 won. I only have 1,650 won left for my $200 conversion, so the purchase of only one painting was an easy decision. Of course, I always try to translate the cost of an item into a common denominator. I checked the room service menu and found that a beer costs 30 won, so I calculate the painting cost about 50 beers. I thought to myself, I don't need beer. This trip is drug enough. Besides, when you walk down a darkened street alone, a clouded mind is not a wise decision. Not that I feel threatened, but I'm always ready to run if I can, fight if I must. Twice I found myself in areas that appeared to be borderline scary. It goes against my grain, but I quickly retreated. It's that 6th sense that kicks in. Some might call it intelligence. I think it's more like fear. It wakes one up. The sense of hearing becomes acute, the listening for footsteps from behind, the reaction to sudden movements and shadows out of the corner of your eye become intensified. The body and the mind join together with only one thought: survive. One purpose: home. To you. Jeffrey. Day 3, March 25th, 2006. Beijing to Lhasa to Chengdu. Chengdu, China. Altitude 10,003 feet. Population 10,596,900. March 25th, 2006. Dear Di, I'm on the plane to Tibet after a long night. Actually, it was pretty short as far as the sleeping goes. Hit the sack around 4 a.m. The wake-up call came at 5 a.m. I missed the ceiling by about 3 inches. I was in that deep make-up sleep cycle when the phone rang. I literally sprang from the bed, to which, by the way, I would compare to our bedroom floor, though not as soft, from my experience. Once awake, there was no way I could fall back to sleep. I showered and tried to remember when the guide was scheduled to arrive and drive me to the airport. With everything packed and ready to go, I thought, what the hell? I have time for another walk. I'm glad I did. It was a totally different experience from just a few hours before. People were beginning to walk in Tiananmen Square, so I followed. Evidently, they raised their flag every morning at 6 a.m., and since it was Saturday, there was a huge crowd forming at the flag-raising ceremony. I was the only person wearing shorts, and as far as I could see from my vantage point off to the side, I was the only Anglo-Saxon in the crowd. Immediately following the ceremony, I hoofed it back to the hotel and, sure enough, the guide was waiting. After I apologized for being 15 minutes late, we headed for the airport. Things moved smoothly at that time in the morning, at least until we approached the airport. Nothing but traffic backed up for miles. If you don't think that gets the old blood pumping, you'd be mistaken. But we made it through with time to spare. The only hurdle left was to pass through security. Sounds easy, doesn't it? Well, let me tell you, they were channeling people through the scanners like smelt swimming to Lake Superior. Until they looked at my backpack. The bottled water that I brought from the hotel sent out signals like a flare. The bottles were on the outside of the pack, so the guard opened them and gave them a sniff. Through hand gestures, he indicated that there were other bottles inside the pack. At first, I said no, and then it hit me. The X-ray had picked up my jar of peanut butter and the 2 containers of Winnie the Pooh honey. I was then directed to the special table where we laid down the pack. Carefully, I cracked open the bulging beast, plunged my hand down into the main compartment, and was able to extract, with some difficulty I might add, the jar of peanut butter. He indicated that there was more in there, but that's when I had my first Chinese standoff. I looked at the pack, he looked at the pack. And then we both looked at the people stacking up behind me. We looked at the pack. Neither one of us wanted to bust that baby open. He blinked first. Okay, he said, you go. I guess there is safety in numbers. Anyway, I'm on the plane. Only 6 hours to go. Jeffrey. P.S. I'll write more later. I've got to get up and walk the aisle. Movement frees the dog. March 25th, 2006. Dear Di, flying into Lhasa. Bumpy comes to mind. We flew in low over the mountaintops, people puking to the left and right of me. What's wrong with me? I like it. What a way to go if one has to go. I'm not worried, though. The old Tibetan next to me is sleeping. I could use a little shut-eye myself, but I don't want to miss anything. I'm breathing through my mouth to resist the urge to join the others in the plane with their current group activity. You know how I am around the smell of puke. They announce something over the intercom in Chinese. I'm guessing we have to divert to another airport because of the wind. I'd like to use a word to describe my feelings at this moment, but I'm sure the kids might read this, so I'll keep the expletives to a minimum. I have to give the Chinese credit. The pilot took 3 runs at landing that plane. At times, I felt like we were flying in an old tail-dragger airplane instead of a modern-day jet with 300 people on board. The nose of the plane was high, while the back end of the plane was cutting through the gusts of wind like a rudder on a sailboat. So it goes. I guess I'll just have to play the hand that's been dealt. Good thing I brought my tent. The stewardesses are walking down the aisle, passing out fresh puke sacks and retrieving the old ones. What a hoot! I couldn't make this shit up if I tried. Once we're stable, I'm going to walk down the aisle and find the Swiss guy who lives in Lhasa and speaks a little English. He might be able to tell me what this all means. Jeffrey. P.S. The Tibetan across the aisle just woke up and smiled at me. I'll take that as a good sign. They're passing out free beer. If I get 49 more, I will have paid for the picture that's rattling around under my feet. The kid who gave me the beer smiled. Guess they haven't had too many takers. March 25th, 2006. Dear Di, it's about 10:30 p.m. We avoided the crash landing and I am somewhere in Tibet. Or perhaps China. They diverted the plane to somewhere. I don't know where I am. It is dark and the air is heavy and humid, and that's about all I know. It took another 2 hours and 40 minutes to arrive at wherever this is. But the good news is, Air China found all of us a room, and will make another run at The Hill, the highest commercial airport in the world that can land jet airliners, at 7 a.m. tomorrow. Don't know if they will feed us or not. Kind of hard to ask. Just happy to have a room. Checking the finances and all I can find is 50 won. That's about $6. Hope I can find a pocket with more money in it. There's probably an ATM somewhere, but to go looking for one might be foolish. No clock in the room. Can't even ask for a wake-up call. Could be a problem when it comes time to leave. They speak less English here than they do in Beijing. Don't think you would like this one. The bathroom is pretty old, and the bed is hard as a rock. At least the toilet has one of those paper things that says, sterilized, I think. I tried to call the tour company, but can't get the phone to work, and the operator says, in Chinese, what I interpreted to be the equivalent of, huh? There was hot tea waiting for me in my room, so here I sit trying to read my tea leaves in my empty cup. Just had a knock at the door. When I opened the barrier to the unknown, a young girl made a gesture with her hands like she was eating, and for me to follow her. Appears the tea leaves indicated good luck. I'll write more later. I ate with a doctor from the Swiss Red Cross and an administrator of a Norwegian university. The Swiss doctor is trying to save the Tibetans by improving their water purification systems and by distributing proper medical treatments and supplies in the remote regions. The Norwegian administrator is overseeing a program that will select 30 Tibetans to attend the University of Norway for 1 year before returning to Tibet. They are hoping this program will save the Tibetan culture from extinction. If you ask me, both of them appear to be headed toward failure. The doctor said that in outlying areas, hepatitis B is running at 50%, and that without intervention, 10% of that population will die. With all the clamor of the waitstaff and the hushed voices they were talking in, not to mention the 2 different dialects of English as a second language they were speaking in, I didn't hear a timeline as to how long that 10% will last. It could have been 10% a year until they are all gone. 1 out of 10 people, dead. The Norwegian woman said, "Heaven help them if AIDS ever breaks out in that country." The doctor just kept his head down and said, "Oh, it's there." The government just downplays the statistics. It's better to say the individuals died of the complications that accompanied the virus. Both the doctor and the Norwegian seemed a little hesitant to discuss the issues openly at the table. After all, we're in China, and the Chinese seem to think that Tibet is one of their regions, not a country. I was told that the government monitors all the reports, including their computers, whenever foreigners utilize the internet and pass through customs. After our dinner together, I went for a walkabout. It didn't take long to feel like a fish waiting to be filleted. I walked back to the hotel and tried to call the guide again. No luck. Had to draw pictures for the desk clerk to ask for a wake-up call. Time to sleep. Jeffrey. Day 4, March 26th, 2006. Chengdu to Lhasa. Tibet Hotel Guest House, number 64. Beijing Central Road, Lhasa. Population of Tibet, 2.6 million. Lhasa, Tibet. Altitude, 12,400 feet. Population, 300,000 to 400,000. Lhasa is Tibet's largest city and billed as a holy city of the mystical Buddhist kingdom of Tibet. In Tibetan, Lhasa means the land of the gods, or holy place. Potala Palace, former winter residence of the Dalai Lama, is considered one of the architectural wonders of the world. Every Dalai Lama has lived there since the 15th century, approximately 1447 to 1959, when the Chinese took over administration of Tibet. During this time, the current Dalai Lama escaped into India. The Tibetans, Buddhists, believe that the Dalai Lama is a spiritual leader who continually reincarnates over the millennium. A council of monks, after the death of their preceding Dalai Lama, selects the next Dalai Lama. The process takes years. They search the country, testing children around 3 or 4 years of age who have been identified as being special. The test consists of filling a room with a multitude of articles, which includes one possession of the previous Dalai Lama. If the child selects the one article, well, there you go. God's chosen one. The Jokhang Temple, built with a golden roof, is considered one of Tibet's holiest shrines. Barkor Street and Narbulinka Palace are the old market areas of Lhasa. March 30th, 2006. Dear Di, woke up early and went for a walkabout. I saw an English sign on a window of a store that has led me to believe I'm currently in the city of Chengdu. I'm guessing, but I think the region is the home of pandas. The cigarette packages in the airport had pandas on them, as did all of the souvenirs that were being displayed. We were herded early today and loaded on the bus at 6:30 this morning. No breakfast, but I really didn't care. I was out walking before we were headed for the airport. I had packed my bags, and when I returned to the hotel, the bus was already loading. I raced back to my room, grabbed my stuff, and made it just in time to be the last one on the bus. Certainly would have been a faux pas if I had missed that puppy. As it was, I just followed the crowd, stood in the lines that they stood in, went through security again, and was back on the plane. I was a little luckier than the Swiss doctor and the Norwegian administrator. They were detained. Guess that will teach them to talk to the likes of me. They did finally arrive about 5 minutes before the plane departed. Neither one of them was smiling. Oh well, we're in the air. Next stop, Tibet. Jeffrey. March 30th, 2006. Dear Di. Well, as usual, I'm late putting down my thoughts to you. I usually just go about the day, accepting what comes with the thought that I'll write about the adventures at a later date. It's only when there is a life-threatening event do I bother with some notes. I think the fire last night qualifies as a special event. But once again, I get ahead of myself. Maybe it's best that I start at the beginning. Well, not really the beginning. Let's just pick it up after the aborted crash landing a few days back and fill in the gaps. Jeffrey. Day 4, March 26th, 2006. Dear Di. Once landing at Lhasa the next morning, I met my guide Nima and his driver. I didn't catch the driver's name, nor did it appear that my guide wanted me to establish any kind of relationship with him. He was, basically, my Chinese watchdog. Seemed nice enough. We drove into Lhasa, dumped my stuff off at the hotel, and drove over to the temple on the hill that is always pictured whenever there is a reference to Tibet. Normally, when tourists arrive in town, the guides recommend they rest for a day and a night. It takes time for the body to adjust to the 12,000-foot altitude, but Nima said that if I was good to go, we should make the climb immediately in order to get back on schedule. We went to the palace of the Dalai Lama and hoofed it up the hill to see the sights. Entering the monastery connecting to the palace, Nima and the head monk began exchanging greetings and chattering back and forth. Nima told me that the monk said I must be a healthy American, to have just landed and then hiked up the hill. I'm guessing that they've had to send the young monks out several times to help the fat Americans who couldn't make the trek unassisted. Well, of course, I was feeling pretty proud of myself, but 12,435 feet is an altitude that catches up with everyone, no matter how tough. I was told altitude sickness is like a headache that stretches across the front of your forehead and stays there. You can have dizziness, diarrhea, upset stomach, and a plethora of other bad side effects. To me, it sounded like the day after a long night of drinking. Being a seasoned veteran, I figured that I could handle all the symptoms. Though I must admit, when it hit, I was not a fan of that headache. It stayed with me the entire trip and never went away. There was nothing to do except suffer. I had to deal with it and not let it ruin the entire trip. I knew from my trip to Peru that there's medicine a person can take to help. Basically, it's the stuff some athletes take, illegally, to increase their red cell count. Coca leaves worked great in South America, but they don't seem to have anything like that around here, and I'd be too scared to ask. After touring the palace, Nima took me to the central market. He assumed that I would be like the other tourists he had dealt with. You know, the ones that come with the intention of buying junk and then hauling it around with them. I think he was disappointed when I walked out of there with nothing. No kickbacks for him. Perhaps saying I walked through the market is incorrect. It was more like a weaving motion, as I was beginning to feel the effects of that altitude. You can bet that I did my damnedest not to let on about the status of my condition. It is always best to negotiate from a position of strength, and in a foreign country, you never know when negotiations are going to take place. Back at the hotel, we had a traditional Tibetan meal. Basically, that involves an array of vegetables and meats, cooked, fried, boiled, dried, you name it, on a lazy Susan, spinning around while you grab what you want. I grabbed a little bit of everything, no matter what it looked like, smiled when I ate it, and said thank you after I was finished. I went back to my room, plopped in the bed, and thrashed around for hours listening to Chinese TV, catching little cat naps here and there. When I couldn't take it anymore, I went out for a walk. It was well after midnight in Lhasa, so I was constantly shaking off the flow of taxicab drivers that scoured the streets for one last fare. I probably walked a good 2 miles down the street in front of my hotel before I found a little restaurant still open, and through Pig Latin and sign language, I was able to purchase a Lhasa beer, the largest one they had. No, I didn't misspell Lhasa. I know my beers from my cities. I thought I would drink the beer back at the hotel, perhaps allowing me to sleep, one thing that I desperately wanted at this point. But the flow of adrenaline wouldn't allow it. That bottle of beer never made it back to the hotel, and neither did I for quite some time. Using a cigarette lighter, I can field dress a pop-top bottle with no problem. The problem that night was walking right by the hotel and not even recognizing it. Bummer. After walking a couple of miles or so further down the road, I could sense that I was in the wrong part of town. Nothing but mud huts and darkness. I wasn't afraid because I at least had half a bottle of beer to use as a weapon, if necessary. I also knew that I could simply turn around and walk back the other way, which I did, paying closer attention this time. I finally found my hotel and went back to my room, feeling better for having exercised, but still unable to sleep. The next thing I knew, it was time to head out to our next destination. Day 5, March 27th, 2006. Lhasa to Gyantse. 270 kilometers, 162 miles. Gyantse Hotel Number 8. Yingshang Road, Gyantse. Trepang Monastery to Tamdorkso Lake, to Corolla, to Ice Mountain Glacier, to Gyantse, to Gupsala Pass, 16,732 feet. Gyantse, altitude 12,467 feet. Population 15,000. Dear Dai, got to see the 5th Dalai Lama's tomb. Huge. 3,721 kilograms of gold. What can you say, standing in front of so much wealth on one side of a wooden rail, while on the other side a smiling monk is standing in a ragged red robe guarding it? Being a capitalist and all, I find it amazing that no one has looted the temple in all these years. Must be some kind of power besides money. What a strange concept. Today we drove over the Yola Pass on top of a mountain range, but not the Himalayas. I have to tell you, it ranks right up at the top as far as blue sky country goes. Nestled in the hills and dale, there is a lake they call Tamdorkso, translated as the Holy Lake. Nima asked the guide to pull over, and I stumbled down to the lake while he and the Chinese drivers relieved themselves next to the road. I tentatively put my hands in the lake water, as I wasn't sure how the water gods were going to take to a heathen. The water didn't boil, so I washed my face in it and felt the coldness of the water momentarily take away the shooting pain in my head. The pain. How do I describe it? It starts in one temple, runs across the front of the forehead to the other temple, and ends in an almost half halo of misery, mist, and fog that is fast becoming a constant in my life. For not having much oxygen in that part of the world, it certainly seemed like the wind was always pounding the senses. Of course, I was only wearing my 2 pair of bike riding leggings underneath my shorts, 2 shirts and a sweatshirt, and, come to think of it, I was wearing everything I brought with me. Couple that with the gusts blowing at about 20+ miles an hour, and an ambient temperature that hovered between 8 and 14 degrees below 0 Celsius, some might think it was a tad bit cold. I must admit, though, my layer of lard was performing admirably. Back in the car, the fresh, chilly air stimulated conversation for a while. I told Nima that one thing I noticed about the countryside was the lack of cemeteries. He explained that in Tibet, they basically have 2 types of funerals. The water funeral, where they dump the body in a lake or a river, or the open-air funeral, where they leave the body on a mountainside for the birds. He explained that they have special people who take the body to a designated mountain at the family's request. He also said that the water funeral was one of the reasons many Tibetans don't eat fish. Oh, great. I just finished washing my face in the holy lake. Makes one wonder why it was considered holy, doesn't it? A human dumping ground for the poor, perhaps? The guide and the driver seemed to be chuckling quite a bit after that stop. It was another night in a cold hotel where my driver, my guide, and I were the only guests. I planned to go for another walkabout, but I asked my guide about it. He said it was okay, but to be careful. A lot of drinking in this area. Well, I took that as a definite no. No one likes to come right out and say that there are bad parts and bad people in their country. Sometimes you just have to read between the lines. I just stayed in my room watching Chinese TV and trying to sleep. The sleep never came. At least, not for a long, long time. And then it was more like collapsing from exhaustion. Day 6. Gyantse to Shigatse. Shigatse Hotel, number 13. Jiefang Central Road, Shigatse. Gyantse to Shigatse, 94 kilometers, 56 miles. Shigatse. Altitude, 16,732 feet. Population, 12,000. Dear Di. 2 mountain passes today, and it was slow going. Good thing we have a new vehicle. It was a short but long drive to Shigatse, which was nothing more than a staging area before the long trip to Everest. The day consisted of sightseeing monasteries and tombs, smelling the incense and shooing away the beggars. It was the usual sleepless night in the hotel with Chinese TV. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore, so I had to go on a walkabout. I hadn't asked Nima about the area, but I just thought if I'd play it cool, there would be no problem. I went outside, not knowing what time it was. I only knew it was dark. No clocks in this hotel. I suppose a watch would be a good thing to bring on a trip, but I've never been a fan of watches. Or time. Once outside the hotel, I realized that I'm in a gated area with no one around to let me out. Well, scaling a wall has never been much of a problem for me, but as I was walking around looking for the spot to make my ascent, I luckily found a latched gate that I could unlock. I was free, except for the constant headache that seemed to go wherever I went. I looked left, I looked right. Left looked dark and scary. Right had lights and activity, so I chose right. The night air felt good, cool and refreshing, and I was looking to put in a good 5 miles, give or take. It didn't turn out that way. A few blocks down the street, I noticed several taxis waiting outside one particular place. At first, I just thought it was a bar or a nightclub. I didn't pay much attention to it. Then I heard the footsteps coming from across the street. I picked up the pace, wanting to hightail it out of there, when suddenly I heard this, "Hello, hello." I turned and saw 2 young girls coming toward me. Bang! I went out into the street and kept walking, relying on my previous experiences that people don't like to follow you out into a busy street. The problem this time, however, was that the street wasn't busy. They kept following me, shouting, "Hello!" So I crossed the street to the other side. I turned around, shook my head, and said, "No." One of the girls put her hands together and then laid her head on them in a gesture of sleep. I shook my head more vigorously in the dim streetlight that shrouded us, and once again said in my most demonstrative voice, "No." I crossed the street again, thinking they would get the message. I could still hear them following me, so I changed direction mid-street and headed back to the hotel. I give. I didn't need a walkabout that bad. As I made my way past the obvious whorehouse where all the cabs had been waiting, one of the girls walked up and tugged at my vest, while the other girl made one of her hands into an O, and using her index finger of her other hand, poked it in and out. Now, I think everyone involved in this process knew what the hell was going on, but I reinforced my intentions by jerking my vest out of the other one's hand and shouting, "Poo!" which is the Chinese word for no. Being Tibetan, it probably didn't mean much to them. You'd think that would have been enough. It wasn't. They laughed and giggled as I turned and headed for the hotel gate. Just before I could reach it, one of the girls came up from behind and goosed me. I spun around and yelled in English, like that would do any good, "Hey, knock that shit off!" They flittered to the side a few feet, laughing and giggling. I made it to the hotel, let myself in, and relocked the gate. I went to my room, wondering, why me? Jeffrey. March 30th, 2006. Dear Di, it's been a couple of days since I last wrote On Our Way to Everest. Seems like a lifetime. As I write this account of the last 2 days, I am lucky to report that I am back in Shigatse, where the hookers accosted me, in the same hotel, and I'm not leaving it. Instead of going for a walkabout, I'm in my room writing to the only person I want goosing me. Maybe one does gain wisdom in Tibet. Let me go back in time and explain. Jeffrey. Day 7, March 29th, 2006. Shigatse to Mount Everest Observation Hotel by the Rongbuk Monastery. Shigatse to Mount Everest, 360 kilometers, 216 miles. Dumbuk Pass, 17,080 feet. Tingri, altitude, unknown. Population, not more than 50. Base camp altitude, 20,041 feet. Population, 105. Mount Everest, 29,028 feet. March 29th, 2006. Dear Di, the next day we headed for Tingri, the last stop before arriving at the base camp on the north face of Mount Everest on the Tibetan side. How do I describe this leg of the journey? Let's just say that your starting point is twice the altitude of Denver. You travel about the same distance as the state of Nebraska, go over 4 passes, which are now 3 times the altitude of Denver, and then head up. Oh, and did I fail to mention that this is all taking place on washed-out, rock-laden dirt roads? What a hoot! Better than the rides in Disneyland. Well, that was for the first 4 or 5 hours. It gets kind of old after that. There's no way to adequately describe the scenery or the culture of Tibet. They are hardy people in a hard land, living on top of the world, traveling back and forth in yak carts, trying to eke out a living. Some also travel by means of a cart pulled by a small, oil-puffing, 2-stroke tractor, no bigger than a small riding lawnmower. It was common to see these vehicles transporting workers and families back and forth to where they were headed. I just hope that the 500 or so pictures I took can relate some of the experience. The most important thing was that we finally made it to Tingri. Only one more gate to pass, and we would be at the base camp of Mount Everest. Just one problem: the locals wouldn't let us through. They explained to the tour guide that only yak-drawn carts could go on the path. After a few minutes of the Tibetan version of a Chinese standoff, we lost. We went to the lodge, a rectangular building about 60 feet long by 12 feet wide. It had an opening that led to a hallway with access to about 6 rooms running the length of the building along the back of the barracks. The rooms seemed to be about 10 feet by 10 feet, with 4 cots in each. 3 lined up facing the door, 1 along the inside wall. You get the idea. Let's just say that when you entered the room, there wasn't a lot of extra space to be had. They gave me my own room, and as my guide was helping me put my stuff in it, I couldn't help expressing my displeasure at not being able to go to the actual base camp on Mount Everest's north face. Nima tried to poo-poo me, but I would have none of it. I told him that if the Tibetans would let us go to base camp, I'd give them my tent. It had always been my plan to sleep on the face of Mount Everest in my tent. Not at the top. That might take a little bit of forethought, something I wasn't particularly good at. Plus, perhaps some warmer clothing might be necessary. Even in the dynamics of the moment, I knew it was going to be colder than anything I have ever experienced. A different kind of cold, as the saying goes. I knew it was going to be cold enough tonight in the cattle pen they called my room, with no stove or heat, let alone on the face of Everest. My only thought was to at least get to the base camp. My offer of giving the Tibetans my tent worked. After talking with them, Nima came back all smiles, saying that I was a very lucky man. They had agreed to the exchange. Lucky my ass. That was a $379 tent. It was okay with me. I never liked how that tent set up anyway. So we were off, bumping and grinding our way up to the base camp the last 10 kilometers. I couldn't have asked for more. No clouds, the sun was shining, and we arrived just before sunset. I took the same picture over and over. I was awestruck. I was there, majestically hovering over me, the summit of Mount Everest. I have been to Everest. The dream that started off as no more than a direction had somehow delivered me here, into a moment that I will never forget. It really was one of those separation of mind and body experiences. I had done it. I was on the face of the grandest mountain of all. I don't know why it should mean so much to me, but it did. It was here that I made a misstep that I will always regret. Being the only game in town, so to speak, all of the Sherpa started circling around me, trying to sell their wares. The only thing I wanted to do was hike, aka stumble, around the base camp and absorb the atmosphere. What little bit of that was around. The Sherpa and their families who live at the first base camp, where the actual ascent begins, all try to sell you something. It is their only way of making a living. At first I bought a couple of hand bracelets for the women in my life, you and Court, but that only encouraged them and they began to swarm. So I politely said "Boo Yao," and they politely left. Unfortunately, I passed on purchasing the rocks with seashells lodged in the center of the stone. I was amazed they actually found such fossils on the highest mountain in the world. I should have bought some so you could show them to your kindergartners, but I didn't. I don't know why. It wouldn't have been but a few more wands. Perhaps it was the magnitude of the moment. Perhaps it was the altitude. I don't know. But I do know when the sun went down, it was cold. Nima led me into one of the Sherpa's tents to have a cup of yak tea with the leader of the camp. The children from the camp entered from a back flap and hovered in the shadows. I coaxed them out with the candy I had brought, but otherwise, they considered me pretty strange. Of course, I was the only outsider there, that I saw, and most assuredly the only one in shorts and pantyhose, my fancy spandex. I definitely did hit it during the off-season, and since there was no TV in this part of the world, I was the only game in town. As we drank yak tea, I listened, as if in a dream, to a conversation that I could not follow or understand. I just smiled and laughed at what I thought might be the appropriate moments. But it was a feeble attempt. My head was pounding, and I could feel the dizziness creeping in. My only true focus was trying not to fall off the bench and roll into the red-hot turd burner that was situated in the center of the tent. It supported a kettle and an endless supply of yak tea. While Nima and the head Sherpa were talking, I surveyed the area. I saw several portable plastic oxygen bottles, about 1.5 feet long, that they take up the mountain. I asked Nima if he could purchase one for me, just in case. Before we left, he did. We headed back to Tingri on a path that was only meant for yak carts. It was bitter cold, and we traveled slowly in the moonless night. The starlit sky was our only guide along deep plummets of purple that plunged into the unknown. I'll leave it at that. I won't attempt to put any more thoughts into words about that dark and eerie trek. My only perspective from the back seat were 2 headlights shining out onto a cart path made of rock. Once back at the lodge, which in reality was a converted yak shack, Nima led me to my room with his flashlight and helped me light 3 candles. He stuck them on a flat piece of wood lying at the foot of the empty bed beside me. Nima was impressed with my sleeping bag, but also said to feel free to use the yak blankets that were piled on the bed. I told him thanks for helping me to complete a dream, and I would see him in the morning. He went back to the activity center, which was nothing more than 2 yak shacks side by side, with yak blankets covering the openings in their version of a door. This is where all the meals and socializing took place. I crawled into my cold sleeping bag, with my only thought, home, and you. I must have dozed off for a moment. Perhaps it was longer. I don't know. But I do know that the next thing I saw, nay, felt, were flames leaping up by my head about 2 feet high. I must state for the record that it may not have been the flames that woke me. It may have been the warmth of the flames that seemed out of place. The temperature gauge in the car had indicated that the outside temperature was 27 degrees below Celsius when we returned to the yak hut. I don't know how cold that is with the conversion factor, but I do know that minus 40 degrees is the same on both scales, Fahrenheit or Celsius. It's cold. The one thing about fire is that it needs oxygen, and we were both fighting for our share of it. The fire was gently licking its way seductively along its path, gaining strength with each passing moment. In my quasi-delusional state, it suddenly struck me. The bed next to me was on fire. I leapt up and screamed. Not hollered or shouted, mind you, no. It was a primordial scream. Fire! Fire! There was no response. I used my hands and tried to beat the flames out, but the black belt reflexes were losing. In the light of the flames, I spotted one of the yak blankets, grabbed it, threw it over the fire, and then continued trying to beat out the flames. There I am, in a smoke-filled room, in the cold and the dark, with no one coming to my rescue. Only stillness. But the flames were extinguished. So what does one do in this situation? Well, I shivered back into my sleeping bag and started working on a story of how to explain this to the Sherpa when they showed. Of course, I was hoping maybe no one would notice. It was just a little fire. Looking back, I think I should have been a little more thorough in my after-fire review, but the exertion of energy left me collapsed on the bed. Moments later, I awoke with a start as the room filled with smoke. I jumped up, which, by the way, you don't want to do in a smoke-filled room. Coughing and choking, I looked down and saw the smoldering yak blanket was glowing. Not knowing what else to do, I picked it up, exposing the bright red embers deep inside. Stumbling over the beds, I burst out into the darkened hallway, looking for the passage out. It was nothing more than a gray area to my right. I made my move. Tripping over the slop buckets, I bounced off the hallway walls until I spotted the opening to get out. I burst through the yak curtain that was doubling as the door, ran out into the parking lot, and gave the blanket a mighty heave, tossing it as far as I could. I just wanted to get it off my blistering hands. The glow flared higher as the sudden movement fanned the embers, blinding me momentarily with smoke and flames, stinging my eyes and making me cough uncontrollably. There would be no more working on a story to explain this one. I sprinted over to the activity center, not even realizing that I was in my stocking feet, running across Himalayan quartz that, by all accounts, should have sliced my feet raw. I stuck my head through the blanket that covered the doorway and shouted, "Nima, we've got a problem." I didn't wait for the startled Nima to respond. I spun around and raced back to the barn, plunging into the smoke-filled hallway and feeling my way back to my stall. Once inside, I didn't see any more embers or flames. Feeling around, I found my shoes and put them on. Stumbling over something in the dark, I reached down and also found my oxygen bottle that had been sitting next to the burning blanket. It would have been one hell of a boom if that thing had caught fire. By this time, the Tibetan boys had caught up with me. They were in my room coughing and hacking, shining their lights around, looking for more embers and opening windows. After a lot of excited conversation, none of which I understood, we all went back outside and stood around the smoldering blanket. One of the women had fetched a bucket of water and was dousing the glowing red blanket. This Mama-san was talking rapidly and continuously. Nima let her vent, and then translated the exchange in the simplest terms. "You must pay for the blanket." "Of course," I responded. Time passed, and with the excitement over, we all went to our beds. Yes, that's right. I slunk back to my darkened, smoke-filled room and crawled into my sleeping bag, thankful that my 2 encounters with death were over. Well, guess what? It wasn't over. The night was still young. When I laid down and tried to sleep, I heard this rasping noise. At first I didn't comprehend what was happening, but then, with a panic of acknowledgement, I knew what it was. Pulmonary anemia. My lungs were filling up with water. With each breath I could hear the rasping of what I thought was going to be a slow and painful death. Having watched a lot of those mountaineering movies, I remembered that they always made the inflicted person sit upright. I did. I struggled to a corner, propping myself up with as many yak blankets as I could pull in around me. And guess what? It does help. So there I sat, staring out the window at the darkened outline of Mount Everest, trying to think of ways to rectify the situation, and coming up with nothing. The 3 times I had to stand up and go outside to the bathroom, it wasn't by choice. The slop buckets had been utilized during the fire brigade and had disappeared in the aftermath. It was all I could do to stay propped up in the corner, but the instinct to relieve oneself is a mighty powerful motivator. Each time I came back, I jumped in my sleeping bag and burrowed into the blankets to escape the cold. Each time I tried to lie back down and sleep, and each time the eerily rasping sound returned, and I would force myself to sit straight up with my back to the wall. It is beyond me why one has to drink tons of water to avoid dehydration at high altitudes, and at the same time, without proper assimilation and with overexertion, high altitude will cause the lungs to fill with water. But I can guarantee it does, and I can tell you this, it is not pleasant. I kept trying to think my way out of the situation, but there were no paths except the one I was on. Survive the night. There was no crying out for help. It would do no good. The nearest hospital of any value at all was well over 200 miles away, and that would be like going to hell and back. I kept thinking that maybe I should try to find the oxygen bottle in my darkened room and suck on it to see if it would help the headache and the breathing. But I kept reminding myself that I should only use it if I began gasping for air. I sat there with the wind blowing through open windows, the smell of burnt yak hair, my head throbbing, my breathing labored, to say the least, and my neck aching from a bull ride that occurred a lifetime ago. The only thing that kept me going was the thought of you, the love of my life. The only thing I wanted, and will ever want, is more time with you. So, as the time passed that night, I tried to do anything that would keep me awake and alive. I tried thinking the song, 99 bottles of beer on the wall, but only got to 98 before I lost focus. Then I tried counting the stars out the window, but my eyesight isn't that good anymore. I tried to think of Taylor and Court, but those thoughts just made me sad. I felt bad that I had placed the burden on Taylor, that it was his responsibility to recover the body. A smile came over my face when I thought of how his sister would demand that she get to go too. And I knew how mad you would be. Like it would be my fault or something. It could have happened to anyone, really. I kept thinking about the Tibetan types of funerals, preferring the thought of a water burial versus the thought of the birds pecking out my eyes. I have always liked the water, and the thought of feeding the fish was somehow comforting. I figured they could feast for a good week or 2 on my fat carcass, and the thought of it actually gave me a sense of purpose. At last, I would finally be good for something. Some may think it would have been a good time to make peace with one's maker. Me? Well, at that point, death would have been a relief. Don't get me wrong, I was in agony, a suffering beyond all suffering I have ever endured in my life. But the one thing I have learned in my life's journey is that if I had to beg, aka pray, to gain access to the pearly gates or any other kind of club, physical or spiritual, it wasn't worth the price of admission. So, even with my limited thought processes at that point in time, it was, basically, fuck him, her, it, or whatever. If I was going to hell, I figured I was pretty close to the front gate already. No sense in begging for redemption. For the most part, a higher order of thought doesn't work well at high altitudes. But if I was going to die, I was ready. And I didn't want to go out whimpering or whining. Mostly I just stared out the window at the dark silhouette of Mount Everest, second after second, minute after minute, hour after hour, waiting for sunrise. It finally did come, and I did live to see it. Well, like they say, all good things must come to an end. But the experience wasn't good, and daylight meant I had to face my stupidity from the night before. I stuffed my sleeping bag into my pack, folded up the 5 yak blankets that I used as additional cover during the night, placed them neatly on my cot, and exited the burnt-smelling yak shack. We loaded our belongings in silence, into our vehicle parked next to the still smoldering blanket. We walked to the activity center to face the music, but it was a rather gentle punishment. The only people present were 3 young girls who served us breakfast. They relayed the message to Nima that I owed 200 wons, which converts to about $26. Considering the average yearly income for a Tibetan is $2, they didn't make out too badly. I paid the tab and low-tailed my blistered and battered body out of there. After another 10 hours, and 1 fixed flat tire later, we were once again at the Shigatse Hotel. Tonight, as I write, I decided to use up the can of oxygen that I bought on Everest. My lungs feel much better. As usual, I can't sleep, so maybe I should go on a walkabout. But tonight, I'll go the other way. Who says I can't learn from my mistakes? Jeffrey. P.S. Damn. Guess I couldn't go for a walkabout even if I wanted to. The sun is already up. I spent the whole night writing this tale of fiction. Or is it? It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Do I make this stuff up, or does it really happen to a dunce from Nebraska? Day 8, March 30th, 2006. Mount Everest to Shigatse. Day 9, April 1st, 2006. Shigatse to Tsedang. Day 10, April 2nd, 2006. Tsedang to Beijing. April 2nd, 2006. Dear Dai, I am on the plane. My greatest fear at the moment is that they will come by and say, "What the hell is that clicking noise?" Well, that would be my heels tapping together as I keep repeating over and over my mental mantra, "There's no place like home, there's no place like home, there's no place like home." I am a sad state of the man you once knew. I am afraid that this trip, more than any other, has, how shall we say it, burned the travel lust out of my soul. My only fear now is that I shall become the biggest lapdog you have ever had to deal with. It's a good thing that you like dogs, so I feel confident that you will keep me. Your soft heart has always been my strength. But once again, it appears that I'm ahead of the story. Perhaps I should explain. It will not be easy. I lost the last 3 days. Oh, I remember them, but with my lungs messed up, I spent most of the time in a daze, just trying to breathe. Jeffrey. Day 11, April 3rd, 2006. Beijing. Time passes. No notes. No letters. Just survive. Day 12, April 4th, 2006. Dear Dai, I am better now. I will go back in time and try to fill in the gaps. Day 9, April 1st, 2006. Shigatse to Tsedang. It is morning in Shigatse. The sun is coming up. A Chinese breakfast and a 6-hour drive to Tsedang. I liked Tsedang. A small urban town that definitely had an identity of its own. When we arrived, it was still daylight, and since our tour company had nothing scheduled, it was free time. Nima asked, "What should we do?" Well, heck, I don't know what to do in the middle of Tibet on a Thursday afternoon. I told him I wanted a mask to hang on the wall in our home, and he said he'd see what he could do. He left. In the meantime, I stayed in my room and watched Chinese TV, which, by the way, has become very interesting, old movies and local sports events, which are televised on a 24-hour schedule, and not to mention the infomercials showing graphics as to how Chinese women can enlarge their breasts, with some secret Chinese formula. Nima eventually returned carrying a cloth mask that looked like a yellow Santa Claus with a long white beard. He said he chose it because it looked like me, and it only cost 200 won. A real deal. I didn't know how to tell him, no, That isn't what I was looking for. So I took the coward's way out and said it was great, but that I also needed a wooden mask for the wall. He said he'd go look and see what he could find. After 30 minutes, he came back with a great-looking mask. I was really pleased. I hope you will be, too. Boy, was I lucky. According to him, a real deal, the last one they had. He then offered to take me to an out-of-the-way temple. It's one of their holiest places, the first Buddhist monastery in Tibet during the time of the kings and kingdoms. Close to being out of money and always showing the better part of discretion, I said sure, but I need to get a draw on my checking account. We walked over to the Bank of China, and I popped out 1,000 won, about $80, from the ATM machine. Since I also wanted to go to the temple that Nima had scheduled, I decided I needed another 1,000 won. I put the card back into the machine to pull out another draw. The machine came back and said, "Insufficient funds." Well, that can't be right. I know we should have over 5 grand in the account, enough to pay for the trip, and for you to have some spending money while I'm gone. I couldn't believe it. So I put the MasterCard back into the machine and tried it again. The machine ate my card. Now I have to tell you, I don't think I have ever felt that naked before. Standing there, stunned, the guide came up and said, "Problem?" Oh yeah, big problem. This meant that my only access to money was my American Express card. The only problem with that equation is that the backwater places in this world won't accept it. Nobody wants to take it, not even the high-class hotels. They always ask you if you have something else, and only if you say no will they take it begrudgingly. After an hour or so of doing everything except an anal probe, I got my MasterCard back. I mean, 3 people had to pop the machine, then 2 other people plus the bank manager tried to decipher my signature on the back of the card. They kept trying to match it to my passport, but, as you know, no 2 signatures of mine are alike. I have that chicken scratch signature. Once they finally concluded that there was no way to phonetically decipher the scratching, that was my name, they just gave up and handed it back to me. By this time, the sun's beginning its downward path, but I convinced the guide to take me to the temple that normally would cost about 1,000 won. But since I was a special fellow, he and the driver would only charge me 800. I was thinking the problem with the MasterCard was because you and I had pulled out more than our daily limit of $250. I thought, heck, no problem. I could pop another 1,000 won and pay the guide for the mask and the trip the next day. Nima said okay, so we were off. Because of the snafu at the bank, we arrived at the temple just as the doors were closing. I began rapidly snapping off pictures in an effort to recapture lost time. I think Nima was feeling a little guilty, if that's possible, about charging me that amount of money for such a short amount of time, so he obtained special permission for me from the head monk. While Nima was off having yak tea with his monk buddies, they gave me the run of the place for the next hour. Sometimes when things don't work out right, they work out better. As I was wandering around taking pictures of the open sewage canals, I heard all this loud commotion going on inside a walled-off area. The gates were open, so I made a gesture to a person standing there, asking if it would be okay if I took a few pictures and watched. He nodded, so I stood there in amazement and watched as the monks went through, as I later found out, their daily debates. It's quite a spectacle to watch. The young ones, usually 2 or 3 in a group, sit on the ground in front of an elder monk who stands in front of them. It appears that he is constantly grilling his students with questions. Depending upon the answer, the standing monk will either stomp his foot and turn away in disgust, shouting, or he will slap his hands together and then shoot his arm out toward the answering student. The more intelligent the answer, the closer the elder monk's hand will reach toward the student's shoulder. If he touches the person on the shoulder, it means that a correct answer was given. Quite the thing to observe. But the sun was getting low. I had to find my guide. He was sitting with 2 of his head monk buddies having tea. They invited me to join them, so I did. Now I must explain that yak tea comes in only one flavor: green tea in a dirty cup with yak butter dumped in it. Is it good? Let's just say that a cup of fat is not really my cup of tea. However, in their world it is like sugar. The fat is an energy booster and a luxury bestowed on honored guests. I sat there and drank my tea, listening, not understanding a word, but enjoying the conversation. When we rose to leave, about 3 or 4 kids came over to investigate. I gave them some candy, while being careful not to touch their hands, which looked like they hadn't been washed since the day they were born. On the way out of town, I finally saw something I hadn't seen the entire trip. There in the middle of the road of the poverty-stricken town was a pig. I like pigs. I can relate to them in more ways than one. I shouted, "Hey, there's a pig!" I had been wondering where they were. I never saw them in the fields or barnyards, yet at the same time, we were always eating pork. I expressed this to the guide, and he responded, "Oh, it's too cold outside for the pigs right now. They stay in the house until it warms up." Foolish me. We made it back to the hotel. I took a hot shower, vigorously brushed my teeth to remove any excess yak butter, and went to bed. I enjoyed watching an old Chinese movie that was subtitled and dubbed from one Chinese dialect to another. Even on Chinese TV, their lips didn't match the conversation. It was probably the first night I slept for more than 3 hours straight. The next morning when I woke up at 4 a.m., I felt great. My lungs were beginning to clear up. It was time for a walkabout. As my trip progressed, I started to perfect my wardrobe as I went on my walks. Dressed all in black with a hood over my head, my attire gave me some invisibility. Only when I looked up and they saw my white, shining face, or when I popped off a picture, did anybody notice that I was a tourist. I headed out for my walkabout and, as usual, went the wrong way. After about a mile or so, I ran into a gang of 13-year-old girls. There must have been 10 or 12 of them, and I knew I was in for it when the one let out a high-pitched girlish squeal to her other buddies and pointed at me. They all started running toward me, laughing and giggling, shouting, "Hello!" which is generally the only word they know. I replied with my usual "booyow," "don't want," followed by "poo, poo," "no, no." Well, I could see it wasn't working, so I tried my usual method of escape and darted across the street. Now, any intelligent human being would realize that I wanted no part of them. But much to my dismay, as I walked across the street, they surrounded me in the middle of the road. The circle kept getting smaller and smaller until they started bumping into me with their bodies. I don't know what these little girls were doing up at 4 o'clock in the morning, roaming the streets and taunting an old man from another country, but I lost it. I shouted, "Fuck off!" an escape into animalism, I'm ashamed to admit, and made a 360-degree clearing sweep with my body, my hands ready to rip out throats if necessary. The one thing I learned from Taekwondo was that the one who gets the first good hit usually wins. I wasn't about to let them have the choice. It wasn't a problem. They all scattered like a monster had just roared. I spun around and stomped off the way I had come. Behind me, I heard cheers and jeers from the young ladies. The only thing I cared about was that they didn't follow. The opposite direction was good to me. I probably traveled 5 miles or so, taking dozens of pictures along the way. At one point, I found myself in a neighborhood of dark paths, just big enough for a small cart, and lined with small huts. Through the open windows and doors, I would catch glimpses of activity as they lit their stoves and put on the tea. Open canals followed the same paths, and I assumed they were designed for waste removal. I was deep into a societal structure that I knew nothing about. I didn't want to cause a wake, I only wanted to observe. When I started to see other people making their way on the path we shared, I decided that it was time for me to yield. By chance, I passed the farmer's market before it opened. I took a moment and watched from across a dusty street, as it suddenly became a beehive of activity. The sun rose with startling speed once it crested over the tops of the Himalayas. But, alas, all good walking must come to an end, and I made my way back to the hotel. After a hot shower, I packed my gear and was down for breakfast by 9 a.m. The guide and the driver weren't there yet, so I went into the hotel gift shop to browse. It was at this point that I started to turn a little sour on the Tibetan experience. There were 2 young clerks in the shop who followed me around trying to sell me souvenirs. I practiced my Chinese on them and said that I was just looking. And what did I see? My mask. You know, the last one in Tibet? I asked them, how much? One kid says, 200 won. I say no, in disbelief. The other young clerk goes, okay, how about 100 won? Bingo. That's right. That's when it hit me like a ton of bricks. I'd been a fat, rich mark the entire trip. But being a nice guy, I just bought another mask that I liked even better, plus a few trinkets for you guys. The good part of the whole equation was that the hotel gift shop took American Express. They didn't want to, but they did. As I was paying, the kid told me that the reason I got the early morning special price was because I was there without a guide. He explained to me in broken English that when you walk into a shop with a guide, it is understood that you must include at least another 100 to 200 won in the price of the merchandise, so that the guide can receive his or her kickback from the shopkeeper. If they don't pay the extortion, the guide simply doesn't bring his clientele to that shop again. Really, I thought. Now I understood why the guide was always taking me to special places to buy things, and was always somewhat disappointed when I didn't buy anything. With this new knowledge and no cash, I went ahead and bought some jewelry for you and Court, and a hat for Taylor. It might be my last chance to purchase some token treasures. I carried my merchandise up to my room and buried them in my pack. I went back down for breakfast, but still no guide or driver. I made a call to their room. They had overslept and said they would be right down. I said, no problem. I'll just wait for you in the hotel gift shop. While there, I saw some cute yak Tibetan t-shirts and decided to go ahead and buy them from the same kid. Once again, the fact that he took American Express gave him an edge. We had them all in a sack and I was ready to flop out my plastic when the guide came bursting into the room. Instantly, I could see fear enter the kid's eyes. If he got caught selling to a tourist without giving the guide his kickback, I'm sure he would probably lose his job. Immediately, the guide started saying that I didn't need those t-shirts. He knew where there were better ones, and so on and so on and so on. Well, I didn't want to get the kid in trouble, so I put them back and decided against getting the t-shirts. I winked at the kid, much to his relief, and I went to breakfast. The entire time I had to listen to the guide downgrade anything that was in the gift shop, until I almost said, let's go take a look at the masks they have in there. But I realized nothing positive would be gained from it, so I just let it go. Then it struck me that I hadn't received my copy of the American Express receipt. I wanted to make sure nobody would alter it. During the middle of breakfast, I stood up and said I'd be right back. I quickly went into the shop and told the kid I needed my receipt. Before he could get it to me, bang, the guide was in the shop. The kid was scared again, but I winked at him and he got the message. We had to play a little cat and mouse game, but I managed to get my receipt, and I think he'll be able to keep his job. We went back to breakfast and everything was all smiles and laughter again. I thought, right, but since it was my last day in Tibet, I didn't want to make waves. I just wanted to come home to you. Let it be, I thought. After breakfast, you can bet that the first thing the guide wanted to do was hoof it over to the bank and get his 600 won for the mask. I was looking forward to having some money myself. We trotted over to the bank. I put in my card. Insufficient funds. I put it in again. Insufficient funds. This can't be, I thought. But, being an old hand at staring at zero balances, I played it cool. I thought to myself, well, Jeffrey, this is a fine kettle of fish we're in now. According to my calculations, there should have been about $5,000 in the account. Oh, pshaw. Guess we'll have to figure it out when I get home. Anyway, I have the American Express card, if all else fails, right? The guide, however, wasn't taking it quite as well. What does this mean? He asked with a pained expression. It means that there's no money in the bank. I wanted to add something like, what do you think it means? But I knew better. No sense in starting a pissing match in a foreign country. What shall we do? The guide said, almost demanding some sort of restitution. His voice was suddenly turning very cold. Well, I thought quickly to myself, this is the Bank of China. I'll simply take a draw on my American Express card. I asked Nima to translate our intentions to the branch manager. Sorry, we don't do that here. One would have to go to Lhasa, which is 200 kilometers away. The walk back to the hotel had a somewhat stony silence to it. The guide was worried about his 600 won for the mask, plus his tip, which always comes at the end of a tour. When he kept pressing me with that phrase, what shall we do? I tweaked him a little bit by saying, maybe we should take the mask back and get your money back. No matter how special it is, I guess if I can't pay for it, I shouldn't have it. Oh no, that wasn't an option. You could tell by how big his eyes got. Once back at the hotel, we tried to get a line out to the world and see if American Express could help me. Even after an hour of trying, we were never able to make contact. In the meantime, the guide was trying to convince the same kid he was intimidating earlier at the gift shop to take a draw against my American Express, so he could get paid. No way. I must admit, I think the kid was enjoying it. I don't blame him. In fact, I'll bet if he had wanted to, he could have managed it. You would think that the guide, being a Buddhist and all, would have known that what goes around comes around. After we had exhausted all avenues in Sedong, and only after I reassured the guide that he would eventually get his money, we headed back to the airport. It was a quiet ride, which was fine with me, as I was trying to decide whether or not to give the guide my pipe and tobacco. I was still somewhat miffed about being taken on the mask, and who knows how many other independent fees he had tacked on during the trip. But after having my lungs fill with water on the face of Mount Everest, I decided that since I had quit smoking cigarettes in 1996 in Australia, perhaps 2006 would be a good time to quit smoking the pipe. In the end, I did give the pipe to him, even though he insisted that we give the card one more try at the airport. I explained that it has been my experience that these things just don't fix themselves. But he was almost desperate. You must understand that I may very well be his only paycheck for a very long time. As I said, the average salary in Tibet equates to $200. I had already pretty much made his year. Remember, these people have no health care, no insurance, no nothing. It's hard to climb back on that high horse when you've seen how the other half lives. This is why I wrote an IOU to the guide for his 600 won in the airport parking lot and instructed the travel agent via the phone to pay him the 600 won plus $100 as a tip through my account. Handing him the phone so he could talk to the agent directly, Nima was all smiles again when he hung up. In the meantime, when he wasn't looking, I gave the driver my last 36 American dollars, the hidden reserve. He took it quietly and stuck it in his pocket, while Nima's back was turned. There I was, broke in Tibet, but I was at the airport and that was all that mattered. If nothing else, the Mount Everest experience had taught me two things. 1, don't turn your back on a lit flame. And 2, don't take your lungs for granted. As I passed out the last of my parting gifts, a bottle of honey to each of them, the Jif peanut butter to the driver, the pipe and most of the tobacco to Nima, except for 2 packages that I was bound and determined to trade off for jewelry, I thought to myself, I must be a slow learner. It seems I always end up broke and in a foreign country. It must be me. Enough is enough. I give. Just get me home. Dear God. That's right, I invoke my right as a whipped puppy to utilize the God card for my own personal gain. I suppose an apology is in order. You know those thoughts up on the mountain? Well, I was kidding. Take a joke. Just get me home to Diane. Any one of you gods will do. Just get me home without any further incidents. It didn't work. Maybe I haven't gotten the hang of it. But hell, I thought it was worth a shot. 4 days in Beijing. Day 1, April 2nd, 2006. Dear Di, the trip back to Beijing was uneventful. Sally, my contact in Beijing, met me at the airport. It's always nice to see a smiling face, even if you do have to pay for it. Sally was young and spoke English fairly well. She and the driver dumped me off at the hotel in the dark and left me there. 4 days in Beijing with only an American Express card and no money. Something about pissing in the wind came to mind. But hey, quit the whining, I thought. I was alive and in Beijing. Money didn't matter. All I had to do was survive 4 days, and then I was coming home to you. Di, I can't tell you how much I enjoyed calling you that night from the hotel. After trying for half an hour, I finally got through to you. It was a relief to know that the problem was a mix-up in the accounts at the bank. The fact that it was early Saturday morning at home, and you could move some money over to the right bucket made me feel like I was invincible once again. But what really gave me strength was just hearing your voice. You took all the pain away, all the fear. In my heart, I knew all I had to do was survive. My worries were gone. Your voice alone gives me strength. Your words made me laugh, made me cry, and made me feel relief with the mere fact that while I'm gone, you take care of my dogs. Oh yeah, not to mention my kids. I have to tell you, you're doing a great job. Keep it up. It's always easy to be brave doing the fun stuff while someone else is doing the maintenance. So you see, in essence, it's your fault that I do the stupid things that I do. It was a lovely night after we hung up. Looking out my window at Tiananmen Square, I really didn't want any part of it anymore. All I wanted was you. Every night when I went to bed, I always felt that the next day I'd be one day closer to you. Day 2, April 3rd, 2006. Dear Di, this morning when I went down to the hotel lobby ready to draw out money, the ATM said, insufficient funds. I was, how shall we say, all ready to blame you, but fortune was smiling down upon me. Standing there in the lobby, pretending I was just checking my balance, I realized that you had put $500 into the account. I know this because the machine said, balance $461.34. Available for withdrawal, $0. Once again, the weekend float that banks build into their systems to torture us poor people was punishing me. Bottom line was I had money, I just couldn't get to it. Somehow this oxymoron just made me feel like a moron. Staring at my little slip of paper that basically said I was screwed for the day, I noticed a day tour bus loading. I walked over to the tour guide, showed her my American Express, and asked her if that would work. She shook her head and said they didn't take American Express. Welcome to the club, I thought. She did say, however, that she would be able to get me an advance from the bank when the tour was over. I said, great. Where are you going? The Great Wall. I'm in. I didn't have time to go back to my room and put on my biking tights. There I was in my shorts, a long-sleeved t-shirt, and biking shoes. I grabbed a couple of complimentary bottles of water from the front desk and hopped on the bus. I was headed for the Great Wall. It didn't matter that I was somewhat underdressed. I was going to see the Great Wall. Of course, there was the obligatory stop at the Jade Factory, which, by the way, was very interesting. I was going to buy a hand-carved jade ball within a ball within a ball within a ball to show to your kindergartners. But guess what? That's right. They didn't take American Express. I told you it's the best-known deterrent around the world in the battle against buying junk. The Jade Factory was good for one thing, a restroom. As a somewhat seasoned traveler, I always like to utilize facilities whenever available, and am proud of my ability to, how should we say, go on demand? Now you must understand that, for the most part, I have had the luxury of utilizing the civilized restroom facilities, aka the ones you can sit on, at the hotels where I've been staying. Occasionally I've had to utilize the obligatory hole in the floor at several locations. But none of this prepared me for the Big John in the factory restroom. While the other tourists shopped, I bravely walked into the facilities. It was one large, all-white tiled room. There were stalls upon stalls in a row along the wall, and a trough over in one corner. The stalls did have doors, but no toilets. Only tiled holes that flushed for as far as one cared to look. The stall doors didn't go all the way to the floor, nor did the side panels. Everything was about 1.5 feet off the floor. The tile was wet, since they must hose down the floor periodically. They like to keep the restrooms as sanitary as possible. There are a lot of tourists at these attractions, and I've heard that sometimes the peasants from the fields who are visiting the big city like to wash their feet in the restrooms, since there is running water and all. Well, I did the chore, and I do mean chore. Squatting in that position for any length of time is not easy. The only shoes I brought with me were the ones I was wearing, and they were biking shoes with metal cleats on the bottom. A bad choice, I must admit. I had my tissue with me in my man's purse, aka belly belt, so I was somewhat prepared. But I must say, it's a good thing I'm healthy enough to stay in a tight tuck as long as necessary. I would certainly hate to go down in a place like that. I'm betting it could ruin one's day. But enough of the details. I just wanted to set the stage because I really wasn't prepared for what happened next. I came out of the stall, not paying attention to the wet floor, when I did one of those slip, skid, put your foot above your head and do everything but a backflip to keep from going down scenes. Now, if this wasn't embarrassing enough, my commotion attracted the attention of the bathroom attendant, a little old Chinese man. He came over, dropped down in front of me, and started to give me a vigorous leg massage. It startled me at first, not knowing what this was leading to, but I realized the game quickly enough. The little guy wanted a tip for a quickie leg massage. All I have is my American Express card, but no money, not a dime on me. I tried to explain. I ended up fleeing without even washing my hands. No wonder we get labeled as ugly Americans. After a long ride in the worst Sunday morning traffic you'd ever want to see, I found myself standing before the Great Wall of China. The tour guide said that we should all meet back at the bus in an hour and a half. Excuse me? I was hoping to walk the entire section of the wall, or at least more than an hour and a half's worth. Oh well, the best laid plans, eh? Take what is given and go with it, I say. So I did. I was off. Of course, the first part of the climb was congested, jammed, you might say, with old people and children huffing and puffing. I worked my way through with a certain amount of finesse, and once I broke clear, I was gone. Oh, there were a couple of young college professors that tried to hang with me for a while, but they were no match, let alone competition. I don't spend half my days in the stairwells at work for nothing. I don't know what's wrong with me, but when I'm going up, there's no stopping me. I mean to tell you, I was pounding those babies. At one point near the middle, a guy in a t-shirt looked at me, saw the red face, the sweat pouring off, and says, in broken English, "How old?" Not stopping, I replied, 53, between gasps. Actually, that was a lie. We both won't be that old for a few months yet. Once at the top, I gave myself the luxury of snapping a few photos and looking back the way I had come. As you know, I don't like to go out and come back the same way when I run. I looked to my left, walked around in circles checking the horizon, trying to judge distances and wondering how much time I had left. Was going back a different way a possibility? I looked again. Oh yeah, baby, we can make that loop. Then I thought, we damn well better make it, or we will be in big trouble because we have no money, only a camera and an American Express card. We also have no idea where we are, and if we miss the bus, how should we say it? We are screwed. Once again, when we started forcing the we form in our thought processes, you know it's a way to blame someone else for a wrong decision, rather than letting the I take the full blame. So bang, we are off. There I was, bouncing down the steps like a mountain goat with my man breasts bouncing up and down, wishing I was wearing a bro or a man's ear from Seinfeld. I was only stopping to take pictures. Otherwise, it was a full-out run, not a jog. At one point, I asked 2 Australian kids to take my picture. They were a little shocked when I whipped off my shirt, until I explained that I needed a pictorial status of myself at age 53, standing on the Great Wall of China. They laughed and said, "Sure, mate." I explained that my behavior was a reflection of why we elected George W. Bush for president. The majority of Americans are a bunch of loons. They got a kick out of that. I put my shirt on, and once again I was off and running. At the end of one section of wall, I stopped and looked at the next section that crossed the highway and went up the next mountain in the range. I wanted to continue, but sometimes discretion is the better part of valor. Instead, I took off toward the parking lot where the bus was. Much to my chagrin, it was not there. That's when I realized there was more than one parking lot, and they all had buses in them. The blood pressure did shoot up a bit, but I found the bus with 20 minutes to spare. I looked at another section of the wall longingly, but once again, discretion won out. The tour then drove us to have lunch at a Ming vase factory. The parking lot was filled with buses. There was a huge lunchroom above the factory. The room was packed with parents, young and old, with their newly purchased baby girls. I asked a man from Norway how much it cost to save a little girl, and he said about 100,000 using their currency. Based on the current exchange rate, it was about 15,000 US. I doubt if it included the plane fare. After lunch, we went to some dead man's tomb. Not much to say about it. They all start to look the same after a while. I took pictures, though. He might have been somebody special. And then we went back to Beijing. We stopped at a government tea house, and at long last, I was able to draw $200 out of my American Express. I was in hog heaven. On the way back to the hotel, our tour guide told us about a good place to order Peking duck and see a stage show portraying the birth of Kung Fu. Quite naturally, I was the only taker. But boy, was I glad I did. I was a little concerned at first that the guide thought I was taking her out to dinner. That wasn't going to happen. I didn't know how I was going to explain, but I was definitely going to make it clear that I wasn't. The fact is, I wouldn't like it if my honey bunny went out to dinner with another man, so I certainly wasn't going out to dinner with another woman. My worry was all for naught. The guide said she would return to the hotel that evening and take me to the restaurant after she had finished some prior business. When the scheduled time came to meet her, there was a call from the hotel's house phone. It wasn't her. The voice on the other end was a female explaining that the first guide would be unable to meet me as she was tied up in traffic, but if I was ready, she would be able to meet me in the lobby. At this point, things were beginning to smell a little fishy to me, as I recalled the lessons from my African adventure, but I went down to the lobby. This beautiful young Chinese girl came over and introduced herself to me. By this time, I was wondering how I could get out of this situation. As it turned out, there was no alternative motive on her part. This young lady spoke excellent English and wanted to talk about issues of the world. She hailed us a cab outside and proceeded to escort me to the restaurant, which was just down the road from the theater. The cab ride was short, but as with most college students studying English, she wanted to know as much about Americans as a short ride would allow. Once there, she helped me order my duck, left momentarily, and returned with a purchased ticket for the show. And then, gracefully, she bowed out. The duck was delicious. Succulent, to say the least. I was able to watch the preparation of the dinner through a viewing window in the kitchen. Behind the window was an open spit where they roasted the duck. Off to the side, rows of dead ducks were hanging by their necks. I had asked the guide to order the smallest bird possible and a bowl of their bird's nest soup. The soup was served first, about a gallon bucket of it. The duck arrived on a portable serving table with my very own carving chef. He expertly sliced the head off and proceeded to carve it up. During dinner, as I devoured juicy little chunks of fattened duck, I thought to myself that if the show was only half as good as the duck, the evening would be a success. Well, I was wrong. The show was 10 times greater than the duck. The whole time I was there, I kept thinking how I wanted to fly home and bring you back to watch it with me. It was the best professional theater I have ever witnessed, and I've seen a lot of theater over the years. The only thing making it better would have been if you were there to watch it with me, share it with me. Loneliness has the ability to ruin a good time, no matter how good. After the show, I walked back to my hotel. How should I describe the walk? Las Vegas, Tijuana, a circus, and being lost all rolled into one. There were people everywhere, and as soon as they saw me, they started shouting, "Hello!" wanting me to buy something. If they got too pushy, I'd just hold out my American Express card. It was better than having a whip. Once I found my hotel, after hours of wandering, and I was sure of my way, or should I say kind of sure, I decided to venture out again and take in the sights. I headed back to the market, but what a difference a few minutes can make. Evidently, the shops shut down after 10 p.m. They even shut off the streetlights, which tends to spook a guy. By the time I got to the end of the market area, everything was closed up tight. Quite naturally, I decided that this would be a good opportunity to take an alternate route back to my hotel. I noticed flashing lights about a mile down the road. Hell, I had nothing else to do. I walked toward them, realizing too late that Beijing was a lot like Las Vegas. Things seemed a lot closer than they were in reality. It was a bit of a hump, but there's just something about exploring a strange city at night. Not knowing exactly where you are tends to get the blood pumping. I was right about the lights. The modern-looking building with a Chinese flair was open. It was a disco. A musician buddy of mine, who had visited China, had always regretted the fact that he didn't have a chance to go to a nightclub when he was in Beijing. I couldn't pass it up. It was very clean and in a high-rent, multi-story building. You could see by looking at the place, as well as the fashion statements being made on the way in, that the place attracted money. The club was on the second floor. It was accessed via a stairway that curled around the indoor waterfall. Like I said, it was a fancy place. I must admit that most normal human beings, not those still wearing the same gear that they wore when they were stumbling around on Mount Everest, would not have ventured in. Me? I spruced up the best I could. Fluffing my hair with my fingers, I pulled up my tights, zipped my black windbreaker halfway up to hide some stains, put on my best "Hi, I'm from Nebraska" smile, and approached the opening to the establishment. The doorway was pouring out Western hard-rocking dance music that was about 2 decimal points above humanity's limit. Of course, they searched me for weapons on the way in, but I'm sure they weren't profiling. It appeared to be standard procedure in a club like that. I think. You'll be happy to know that I was the only gray hair in the place. I'm not positive, though, because the place was jammed with kids about Taylor and Court's age, and it was tough to move without bumping into someone. Everyone around me was always very polite, but they did look at me rather strangely. You can't blame them. It's probably not that often that an old Caucasian guy comes into the place wearing shorts over black tights. The young ones were curious, but everyone seemed to respect my space and, at times, made special efforts to offer me a cigarette. The evil draw of tobacco was everywhere, but my lungs were feeling a lot better since my return to a reasonable altitude. The temptation was there, but I had been scared shitless. Well, at least tobacco-less. Attempts at broken English conversations were made, but the music was so loud that only polite bows and smiles were exchanged. Kids will be kids, no matter what part of the world you happen to be in at any given time. It was crowded, and they were having fun. I had 3 beers and left. My ears are still ringing. I made it back to my hotel and went to bed thinking of you and how much fun we had when we were their age, and how much better it gets year after year. Only 2 more days until I get to hold you in my arms, kiss you, and tell you how much I love you. Day 3, April 4th, 2006. Dear Di, since tomorrow is my last full day in Beijing, I know I must make the most of it. I told the tour guide that I wanted to see the Beijing Opera that night, so she made arrangements. All it takes is more money than I have left if I do everything that I want to do. No problem, I think. I'll get more. I talked to the hotel clerk and reserved a cab driver that speaks a little English. He's going to take me to the Imperial Summer Palace and wait for me, and then take me back to Tiananmen Square so I can see the Forbidden City. First, I must find out where the American Express office is in Beijing. I decided that I'd take out an extra $100 with a cash advance from the bank. All I have to do is sign my name and agree to the 4% surcharge. No problem, right? Wrong. It went so wrong, so quickly. But this time it was my fault. I was the one who put my passport in the hotel safe. I've never done that before. I have always carried it on me. But the guide had said that all a person really needed for ID was a hotel key and to just leave the passport in the room safe, so I didn't have to worry about it. Yeah, that is until you sit down with the banker lady and hand her your American Express card and ask for a cash draw. She says, "Passport?" in broken English. I say it's at the hotel, and that I was told I only needed to show my hotel key and my card. I must say I am getting better at recognizing hopeless situations, thus abandoning any false hopes and fleeing as quickly as possible. A nice English-speaking lady asked me if I would like some help by speaking to the teller or the manager, but I said no thank you. I mean, come on, we're talking a hotel key and an American Express card. Who could blame her for not taking it? Forget the cash. I would get some later. I had to move on to the Imperial Summer Palace. It was about 10:30 a.m. when we arrived at the Summer Palace. The driver parked by the main east gate, let me out and pointed. I indicated that I'd be back in about 1 hour. He just looked into my face of foolishness, smiled, and said, "Take time." It sounded so simple, but the American in me reared its ugly head, and I decided that if I moved quickly, I could do it all. I tried. I went through the place like I was Sherman marching to the sea. The palace grounds are huge, and I was a blur racing through them. But I did have one little delay at the beginning. I paid the admission price, which was really cheap, and walked through the gate. Inside the door, they have a gigantic relief map with pictures of the palace's layout, matching the brochure they give you when you enter. There's only one little problem. A map is no good if you don't know where you're standing. I looked around to see if anyone was there, that I could ask where the "You are here" symbol was. The only Caucasians I saw standing in front of the map were Germans. They were listening to their guide, a Chinese guy, translating everything into German for them. You know what? All those years of German in high school finally paid off. I stood and listened to the guide explain how the Kaiser came over and was a guest of the Emperor. He also explained how much of the palace had to be rebuilt after the Anglo-French looted it in 1860. When he finished talking and the group started moving away, I quickly said, "Entschuldigen bitte," excuse, please, "Wo ist?" Where is? And pointed to the map. He smiled, pointed, and, in German, said, "Hier. Vielen Dank. Many thanks." I was off and almost running, literally. I went everywhere, and have the pictures to prove it. I was out of there in 2 hours. I only made one little kid cry. It happened when I came over the back wall through the trees. It was a desolate area, but I don't think I was out of bounds. I'm not sure what the sign said, but there was a path. The point is, the path petered out, and I came charging out of the brush into an open courtyard. Well, this little kid took one look at me and screamed something, what I assumed to be the Chinese word for monster. I later learned that it was either Gailo, white devil, or possibly Dailo, trouble or nonconformist. Both seemed to fit. Anyway, the kid was quickly off and running to his mother and father. I laughed, and so did they, thank goodness. It was just a natural reaction for him to run. I just seem to have a way with children. Actually, if I'm lucky, most people react that way to me. I've always wondered how you've been able to cope with me, but then again, you are a kindergarten teacher. You guys don't scare easily, not even when it comes to monfang, that being the Chinese word for whale shit. Or well shit, I'm not sure. It's hard to get the translations down exactly, but the message is basically the same. Not much in this world is lower than that. Unless it be me. On the way back to Tiananmen Square, I noticed another major landmark on the map. I asked the driver to take me there. He dropped me off, and I went into the place they call Heaven's Gate. I paid my entrance fee and started my march through it just so I could say I've been there. Suddenly, at one of those picture-taking spots, this Chinese man and his wife were all excited and indicated that they wanted me to have my picture taken with their daughter. Well, hell, I'm trying to be a nice guy, so I make an okay gesture with my fingers. I'm not sure if they thought I was an American somebody on tour in Beijing or what, but the next thing I know, this young girl, who's probably in her early 30s, is standing next to me, snuggling up like we're the best of friends. Now, the only thing I know for sure is that she must not have the ability to smell, because I'd been wearing the same clothes for the past 12 days. Anyway, Ma and Pa snapped the picture, smiled and laughed, and we all went our separate ways. I really didn't care. If they wanted a picture of Monkey Boy from the States, it was nothing to me. Then damn if I didn't run into them again behind the Temple of Doom, as I like to think of it. It was another one of those tourist picture-taking spots. It was crowded because everyone wants a pictorial of the fact they have been there. The entire building is a huge hunk of marble with carvings of celestial bodies etched into it. Once again, Ma and Pa were there, all excited and indicating that they wanted another picture. Now, before I can communicate yes, no, or plan an escape route, the daughter is standing next to me. She grabs my arm and puts it around her shoulder and snuggles in. Ma and Pa snap the picture, everybody smiles and nods, and I am out of there. I don't know what it was all about, but all I know is that if I saw a picture of you with some guy's arm around you, I'd be beyond pissed. I'd be hurt. Like I say, I don't know what it was all about. Maybe Ma and Pa were trying to make some fellow back home jealous by having her picture taken with the goon from the lagoon, but I thought you should know the story. You know me. I don't even like to put my arm around people I know. Well, I'd best get back on track. I only have 6 hours left on this plane ride before I'm done with these memoirs. Where was I? Oh yeah. I left the Temple of Doom, aka Heaven's Gate, took a taxi to the Forbidden City, and arrived there 5 minutes before they quit selling admission tickets to enter. Somehow, it always seems like I'm surfing on the edge. Once inside, there was no letting up on another death march. I plowed through every nook and cranny I could find. I did find a relief station. No, not a bathroom. A little refreshment facility that sold beer. Can you believe that? And we call them barbarians. Try walking through the White House with a bud in your hand and see how far you get. I feel confident that I made it through most of the museums and different venues before the gong went off, and they started throwing us out the back gate. I knew I'd best be getting back to my hotel, since I wanted to go to the Beijing Opera that night. Quite naturally, I had a very long walk back. After supposedly heading in the general direction of my hotel, I realized that I didn't have a clue as to where I was. I splurged and hailed a bicycle taxi, with a middle-aged Chinese gentleman pedaling in front. I showed him a card from my hotel, and he nodded yes. I made the mistake of paying the man first, so he only took me as far as the north end of Tiananmen Square. He dumped me off, indicating that that was as far as I could go for what I had paid. If I wanted to go any further, I would have to pay him more money. Too bad he didn't take American Express. I hopped out with my swollen feet and started walking to my hotel. I was about halfway up the square. At last I had a point of reference to ferret out a confident direction, when I heard, or rather felt, the explosion. I think my heart literally stopped for a moment, while my mind started in motion. My brain said, that was no power transformer blowing up. My first instinct was to run. But where? Away was a good idea, I thought, but where? Damn it. I knew I should have found the American embassy that first night. Oh well, it was too late for that. I would just have to wait for the screams to see which way everyone else was running and then run for my life. Stay on the leading edge of the stampeding herd, I told myself, but don't outrun them. There's safety in numbers. There's safety in the herd. You must understand that when threatened, the mind resorts to animal instincts, and mine were swirling inside me at breakneck speed at that moment. From my earlier adventure in Africa, I had experience to draw upon. I remember the explosion in Nairobi, then the hollering, then the sirens, and then the gunshots. But there I was inside my hotel room, peeking out a window with no lights on and an empty beer bottle as a weapon. Here I was naked in the streets of Beijing, with only fight or flight as my guide, and an American Express card stuck in the pages of my passport hidden deep within my man purse. That's when the second explosion went off, and it was just as big and loud as the previous one. I was poised, frozen to my spot, looking back toward the north end of Tiananmen Square. That's when I first noticed that some of the people looked around for a little bit, and others simply continued on their way. As it turned out, every day at this time, the soldiers surrounding the square fire off a 21-gun, nay, a 21-cannon salute to Chairman Mao, who lies in state in a tomb at the center of the square. Here I thought it was the next revolution of Tiananmen Square, and that with my kind of luck, I was there in the middle of it. And oh my, I was ready to run over the backs of stampeding women and children to save myself, if necessary. And to think some people considered me fearless. To this day, it still brings a smile to my face when I think about it. I made my way back to my room after just narrowly escaping the Second Chinese Revolution, not to mention having to clean my shorts, when the guide from the tour bus called. She's stuck in traffic, but is sending another friend to take me to the opera house. Once again, I feel uncomfortable meeting women and taking them anywhere. As it turned out, she too was a nice person that spoke English quite well. She delivered me to the opera on time, holding the ticket I was unable to pay for until tomorrow, when hopefully my ATM card would finally work. It was a select ticket in a choice location, right in front at a table filled with food. None of the people, Norwegians and a Russian, at my table spoke English. However, they were all extremely friendly. We made conversation the best we could through gestures and a few words we had in common. They may not have understood howdy, but everyone understands a smile. To be quite honest, I could have missed the opera and not missed it, if you know what I mean. But I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't seen it. At that point in time, all I wanted to do was fill the void until I got back to you. Day 4, April 5th, 2006. Dear Di, today, as I write, my credit card finally works again. Now that I have the money I had promised, I am waiting for the guide to call so I can pay off my debts. She did call, only to tell me that, once again, she wasn't going to be able to make it to the hotel, as she had another tour to do. She asked me to put the money in an envelope and give it to the front desk with her name on it. I did, with a nice tip for herself and her friends. They were certainly a very trusting bunch. Time passed quickly during the ride to the airport, because I was in one of those wonderful states of mind where you want to go, but you don't. You know what I mean? Nothing happened on the way, other than stalled traffic that made my heart go pitter-patter. Then a quick walk through customs, and now, as I write, the plane is north of Omaha, flying over Canada and heading to the Newark airport. Seems an out-of-the-way path, doesn't it? But only a few hours of waiting, another 2 hours and 45 minutes in flight, and then home. Again, Dorothy was right. There is no place like home. Well, my love, as I finish this last leg of my journey, I must tell you truthfully that I have never felt less of myself. The selfishness that I have displayed on this trip exceeds all the others. The money that I have spent on me, and me alone, is more than I care to count. However, if at all possible, I will spend the rest of my days trying to make up those lost moments in time with you. It is my dream that you will never have to be alone again. My hope is that this is the last time you will see my back, until it comes time for you to bury me face down. Because, as you know by now, I am not sure if I have been to hell or not. The flames were licking me in the face. But I am sure of one thing. I have been to heaven, living with you. Jeffrey. April 15th, 2006. Dear Fred and Father, well, I'm not scared anymore. And you know that stuff about China being my final adventure? I'm not sure, but I think I can get a waiver from the Lady Di if I promise to be very careful and not do anything stupid. You get a waiver from Father, and then both of us, maybe, just maybe, A quick week or so in India. P.S. Damn it, I forgot about the pyramids. Do you think we should push for a double waiver or just take them one at a time? May 22nd, 2006. Dear Fred and Father, I was driving back from California with Court, and we were just talking about my trip. I'm afraid I was starting to whine a little bit to her about how my life's adventures were pretty much over, and how, woe is me, there is no more goals to be had in this life. I mean, after all, once a person has been to the top of the world, what's left to do? She gave it about 2 seconds of thought, and said with a smile, "There's always Antarctica." Damn her to hell, or at least to the bottom of the world. I had, at some point in my life, told her that if I ever went to the South Pole, she could come along. She waited for my one moment of weakness, and bang! I guess I'm going to have to take her. Perhaps Taylor will have to come find us both. Then again, maybe down there they just feed you to the penguins. Jeffrey.